Stephanie believed her marriage to Boss Johnny was a mere charade to seal a truce. It was just theater, legally void, without consequence. But at the altar, his whisper transformed the political agreement into an irrevocable vow. Now, she is the senora of a man who deceived her to protect her, and the only way to gain her freedom is to bring down the very empire that keeps her safe. Hey everyone, if you enjoy romance, suspense, and drama stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment on the type of story you like best. The silence of the room was the heaviest thing Stephanie had ever carried. It was a silence pressed down by heavy marble, by tapestries woven with generations of forgotten history, and by the 100 pairs of eyes fixed solely on her. "It's theater," she repeated for the 10th time, the words a frantic mantra against the rising tide of fear. "Just a play for the cameras, for the old families. It's not real." She could feel the cool, expensive lace of the custom gown, a creation of pristine white that felt more like a burial shroud than a celebration. Her hands, shielded beneath a cascade of white lilies, were counting the tiny, perfect stitches on the silk ribbon of the bouquet. A mechanical act meant to anchor her mind to the physical, away from the impossible magnitude of the situation. Her father had promised. A ceremony, nothing more. The contract is temporary, symbolic. She had accepted it, the sacrificial lamb for an uneasy peace between rival empires. Then she saw him. Johnny stood by the granite altar, a silhouette against the filtered afternoon light that streamed through the arched cathedral window. His posture was severe, a controlled, deliberate stillness that hinted at coiled power. He was not merely waiting for the bride. He was an immovable object that the entire room, the entire city perhaps, seemed to orbit. His charcoal suit, impeccably tailored, seemed to absorb all the light around him, making his presence a black hole of calculated gravity. He didn't look nervous, or joyful, or even resigned. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had not only built an empire with his own hands, but who maintained it with a will so absolute, it was terrifying. When his eyes finally lifted and found hers, Stephanie's internal rhythm stuttered. The sheer, relentless intensity of his gaze didn't just meet her own. It consumed it. It was a look that promised irrevocability, a silent, binding claim that contradicted every word her father had used to sell her this lie. "Control, Stephanie. You are an actress. Play the part." She forced her feet to move down the aisle, the movement graceful, trained, automatic. The music, a classical piece played with chilling precision, seemed to accentuate the unnatural formality of the guests. They were not smiling polite, corporate smiles. They were watching, assessing, their expressions weighted with expectation, and a profound, silent knowledge that she, the woman walking the aisle, was utterly lacking. The man standing before them, the priest, was another cold shock. He wasn't the actor her father had described. His hands, old and firm, rested on a heavy leather-bound book that felt too ancient and real for a simple prop. The air was too thick, the silence too profound. It smelled of old wood, expensive perfume, and an underlying scent of fear, a primal warning that was now screaming in her ears, a cold thread of pure panic unwound in her stomach, tightening into a knot. She reached the altar, her body moving on instinct as her hand was placed in Johnny's. His skin was warm, hard, and utterly steady. This was the part of the script where she was supposed to make a small, polite curtsy, smile lightly, and hold the ceremonial document. Instead, she stared at his thumb, which was now moving a fraction of an inch against her wrist. A small, possessive friction that felt like the brush of a velvet cage. "Stop it," her mind screamed. "Say the code word. This is the moment to signal that the theater is done." The priest began to speak, his Latin murmuring low and solemn. Stephanie looked desperately at the heavy ring resting on a velvet cushion. It wasn't simple silver, as promised. It was a solid, intricate band of gold that looked medieval and binding. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the sound suddenly louder than the priest's voice. She tried to open her mouth, to whisper the pre-arranged code, to signal that the ceremony had gone on long enough. She needed to tell him, "We need to cancel this now." Before a single sound could escape her lips, Johnny leaned in. The movement was subtle, a predatory lean that brought his broad shoulder right beside hers. His breath, warm and carrying the faint, clean scent of expensive cologne and perhaps a touch of dark coffee, ghosted over her ear. The proximity was absolute, overwhelming. His voice, a low, smooth baritone, was a private sound meant only for her. A private, final declaration. "Nothing will be cancelled, Stephanie," he affirmed. The words were not a threat of physical harm. They were a declaration of law. He didn't say it with triumph or anger, but with an absolute, undeniable finality. The temperature in the room plummeted. The world tilted. She stared at the solid gold band now being slid onto her finger, realizing with devastating certainty that it was not a prop, but a shackle, expertly disguised. Her father had lied. Everyone had lied. She was not a guest in this theater. She was the prize in an irrevocable transaction. She looked up at Johnny, the fear in her eyes met by a deep, dark passion in his. A passion that was the opposite of love, yet infinitely more powerful and binding. It was the look of a man who had finally acquired what he had intensely desired, and who would let nothing in heaven or earth take it away. He didn't release her hand. He pulled it just slightly closer, securing the bond. The silent vow had been made. The fake wedding was real, and she was now his. Stephanie felt the slow, crushing weight of the word irreparable. It settled over her like the heavy velvet curtain closing on the stage. Only there was no audience applause, no congratulatory farewell. Only the stark, terrifying reality of the golden band now tight on her finger. Johnny's grip on her hand remained firm as the priest concluded the final rites. It was a purely functional grip, yet it held the weight of a contract sealed in blood and a lifetime of commitment. She tried to pull away, a small, involuntary movement of protest, but the pressure of his fingers against her pulse only increased, silent and unwavering. "He knew I thought it was fake. He let me believe it." The thought was a sharp, cold jab of betrayal. She risked a glance up, her eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly hardening into fury. He was looking out at the congregation of silent, watchful guests, his people. His face was a mask of cold, flawless control, revealing nothing of the declaration he had just whispered in her ear. But then, as the guests began their slow, deliberate rise, his gaze flickered down, locking onto her. In that brief, private moment, the mask slipped, or perhaps it was just the intensity of his desire that transcended his discipline. His dark eyes were not cruel, but they were deeply, irrevocably possessive. There was a raw, unsettling depth in them, a fire that suggested he saw past the expensive gown, past the role she was playing, and directly into the core of her resistance. He saw her, and he claimed her. A slow, deliberate smile, a mere shadow of an expression that didn't reach his eyes, touched his lips. It was a smile of a man who had orchestrated a perfect victory. "Walk with me, Cara," he murmured, the Italian term of endearment sounding less like affection and more like ownership when delivered by his low voice. She felt the heat of his proximity, a furnace of controlled power that was suddenly too close. She forced herself to move, to glide down the steps of the altar beside him, maintaining the illusion of the graceful bride. Every muscle in her body was screaming for her to turn, to challenge him, to demand an explanation. But the sheer gravity of the moment, the chilling formality of the environment, held her captive. As they reached the end of the aisle, a line of imposing men in black suits formed an impromptu guard around them. They were silent, efficient, and their mere presence emphasized the absurdity of her father's promise. Actors don't need a security detail this heavy. Outside the church, the air was cool and crisp, but she was burning up under the weight of the golden shackle and Johnny's proximity. He didn't wait for a chauffeur. He led her directly to a massive black sedan that stood alone, its windows tinted to absolute obscurity. Before they reached the back door, Stephanie gathered her fragmented courage. She stopped abruptly, wrenching her hand from his grasp. The action was desperate, but the feeling of her bare skin returning to her control was a small, vital spark of rebellion. "This stops now, Johnny," she declared, her voice low and sharp, designed to carry only to him. She didn't dare raise her voice in front of the silent wall of men. "My father promised it was all for show, symbolic. I am not legally bound to you. I will not be your wife." Johnny simply stood there, an unmoving column of dark granite. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He only listened, the profound silence between them stretching the moment to the breaking point. The cool evening air seemed to hum with the tension. He reached out slowly, a motion that was both a warning and a command. His hand didn't touch her. It hovered an inch from her face, a physical boundary he could cross at any moment. "The papers you signed were not symbolic, Stephanie. The priest was not an actor," he stated, his voice a low, hard rumble that bypassed her ears and settled deep in her chest. "Your father did not lie to you. He simply ensured your destiny. Everything is binding. Everything is legal." He finally crossed the space, his fingers lifting her chin with a frightening tenderness. His eyes, fixed on hers, were a profound mixture of control and a fierce, terrifying need. "You believe you are fighting for your freedom," he murmured, the words gentle yet devastating. "I assure you, Kara, I am only ensuring your safety. The contract is real, the protection is real, and the marriage is mine to keep." With that, he gently steered her toward the car, a movement that was more of a suggestion than a force. But she found herself moving regardless, paralyzed by the realization. The man she hated was not her captor, but her permanent, terrifying shield. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, sealing her fate inside the black, luxurious silence. The drive to the reception was a study in profound, claustrophobic silence. Stephanie sat rigid on the supple leather seat, every nerve ending screaming rebellion against the control exerted by the man seated beside her. The only sound was the hushed hum of the engine, a mechanical purr that seemed to mock the violence raging in her mind. Johnny, however, was a portrait of unflappable calm. His arm rested along the back of the seat, not touching her, yet effectively enclosing her in a private cage. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the shifting lights of the city outside, his jaw set in a line of quiet, absolute authority. His proximity was a palpable force, a constant reminder that he was the immovable boss, and she was irrevocably tied to him. "He didn't lie to me. My father lied about the nature of the man." The realization was a bitter pill. She had always seen Johnny through the political lens of her family. A cold, ruthless rival, an acceptable symbolic husband to maintain the truce. Now, she saw the reality. A man who simply took what he wanted, and what he wanted, she was beginning to understand, was her. Not just her compliance, but her. "Where are we going, Johnny?" Her voice was low, strained, the sound of a fragile object about to shatter. She had to break the silence, to find a crack in his armor. He turned his head slowly, the movement minimal, but commanding. His eyes, in the low light of the car, were dark pools that seemed to hold all the secrets of the night. "To our home, Stephanie." His response was simple, definitive, and devoid of unnecessary elaboration. He offered no apology, no softening of the truth. "Our home?" she echoed, a faint, disbelieving laugh escaping her. "I have a loft. I have a job. I have a life that is not yours to appropriate." "Those were contingencies," he stated, his voice flat, dismissing her entire existence before him. "The loft is secured. Your work is no longer necessary. This is where you belong now. This is where you are safe." The word safe was a strange choice, an unsettling promise. She felt safer 1,000 miles away from him. "I don't want your protection, Johnny," she insisted, leaning forward slightly, the gesture born of frustration. "I want my independence. I want the annulment my father assured me I could have." His response was to finally shift his body, turning fully toward her. He lifted his hand, and she instinctively braced herself for a gesture of force. Instead, his long fingers simply captured her wrist, his thumb resting over the pulse point where the golden wedding band sat. The touch was unnervingly gentle, a contrast to the iron certainty in his eyes. "The annulment is a fantasy, Kara," he whispered, the sound intimate, a private dismantling of her last hope. "Do you think I would bind my future, my very honor, on a lie? Do you think I would invite every one of my rivals to witness a mere theatrical pretense?" The intensity in his voice was a revelation. It wasn't the voice of a man gloating over a political win. It was the voice of a man who had staked everything on this bond. The silent implication was heavy. The wedding was the most real thing he had ever done. "Your father had his reasons for giving you a digestible version of the truth. I will ensure he has his peace. But you belong here, at my side. I built this city. I know its dangers. And you, my wife, are too visible to walk through them alone." He didn't offer a defense. He offered a decree. And in that moment, the fight drained out of her, replaced by a cold, leaden comprehension. She wasn't fighting a single man. She was fighting a destiny, a structure, an entire world that he controlled. The car slowed, turning onto a private drive flanked by high, imposing walls of dark stone. The gates swung open silently, revealing a sprawling estate set against a backdrop of deep, silent woods. The house itself was not modern or ostentatious. It was old, built of the same dark stone as the wall, standing like a fortress carved out of the earth. It was beautiful, undeniably, but it was the beauty of a magnificent, inescapable prison. It radiated power, silence, and an atmosphere so heavy with history and authority that it felt like another character in their drama. She watched as the sedan pulled to a stop beneath a massive arched portico. Every light inside the house was on, warm and inviting, but the exterior still felt cold, a place of secrets. Before the door could open, Stephanie turned to him one last time, her voice cracking with a fierce blend of anger and despair. "You trapped me. You used my own father's desperation to bind me to you forever." Johnny's dark eyes softened infinitesimally, a fleeting shadow of a pained emotion that was instantly suppressed. He gently lifted her hand, turning it over so the back of her wrist rested against his lips. He didn't kiss it, but the heat of his breath was a scorching, intimate promise. "Yes," he admitted, the word a confession, an oath, and a battle cry. "I did, because I am the only man in this world who will protect what is mine at any cost. You are my wife, Stephanie. You will never be alone again." He released her hand, and the door opened, letting in the cool air and the sound of soft, crunching gravel. The silent command was clear. "Exit the car. Enter your new life." Stephanie took a deep, shaky breath, the air filling her with the scent of pine and rich earth, the scent of a wild and dangerous new world. She stepped out of the car, the white gown a startling contrast to the black stone of the house, feeling every eye on her, no longer as the bride, but as the Queen of Stone, trapped in a palace of unrelenting devotion. The interior of the house was a contradiction, vast and luxurious, yet overwhelmingly masculine and silent. High, vaulted ceilings gave way to corridors lined with dark wood and oil paintings that seemed to watch her movements. There was no clutter, no softness, only the cold perfection of organized power. Stephanie felt like a flash of bright color accidentally spilled onto a canvas of absolute black and white. A grand, cavernous dining hall awaited them. A long mahogany table was set with heavy silver and crystal, but it was occupied by the same silent, watching faces from the church, Johnny's inner circle. They were powerful, dangerous men, each one a solid extension of Johnny's will. As they entered, the murmur of quiet conversation immediately ceased. It was an instant, collective acknowledgement of the boss and his new possession. Stephanie's face burned under their collective scrutiny. She was acutely aware of her wedding gown, the symbol of the very lie that had been forced upon her. Johnny's hand settled lightly on the small of her back, a gesture that was deceptively supportive, but which felt to her like the branding of ownership. He didn't push or pull. He merely guided her toward the two elaborate chairs at the head of the table. "This is your place, Stephanie," he murmured, his breath warm near her ear. The statement was not an invitation, but a lesson in protocol. She stood rigid, fighting the urge to flinch. She knew she had to perform, to not show weakness in front of these men who were assessing their new consigliere's wife. She looked across the room, focusing on a massive stone fireplace that remained unlit, a symbol of the cold formality of the evening. When she tried to take her own seat, Johnny was already there. He held the chair for her, an old-world gesture of respect that felt incredibly alien coming from him. As she sat, he didn't move away instantly. His knuckles brushed the lace of her shoulder, a light, fleeting contact, before he finally took his own seat beside her. The silence returned, broken only by the clinking of silverware as the formal, solemn meal began. Stephanie attempted to eat, but the food tasted like ash. Her thoughts were racing, trying to construct a plan, any plan, for escape or defiance. She looked at Johnny. He ate with the same controlled precision he did everything else. Measured, efficient, silent. "I need to speak to my father," she announced suddenly, her voice sharp and brittle, cutting through the silence of the room. It was her first act of open defiance since the altar, and she felt the immediate weight of every eye on her. Johnny didn't pause. He didn't look at her. He simply addressed the man across the table, his underboss, Marco. "Marco, is the security detail around the Russo estate sufficient?" Marco, a man with cold, calculating eyes, responded immediately. "Absolute, boss. No one enters, no one leaves, per your order." Johnny nodded once, then finally turned his head to Stephanie, his expression flat. "You see, Stephanie? Your family is safe. That was the core of the agreement, was it not? Their peace for your presence." He hadn't answered her question, but he had delivered the answer perfectly. He was in control of her family. Her father was sealed off, protected, or perhaps just contained. The only way to guarantee her family's safety was to remain precisely where she was. The realization was sickening. He hadn't just secured her. He had leveraged the lives of her loved ones. He was the protector, but also the jailer. "I hate you for this," she whispered, the words trembling with genuine emotion. She meant them. She hated the deception, the control, the casual cruelty of his power. Johnny leaned closer, resting his elbow on the table, his dark gaze piercing the distance between them. This was their private exchange, a silent battle waged across a sea of crystal and silver. "Hate me, then," he challenged, his voice dangerously low, almost a caress. "Hate is a strong emotion, Stephanie. It means you are not indifferent. It means you see me." He was not seeking forgiveness. He was seeking engagement. He preferred her fury to her apathy. It was a bizarre, unsettling form of affection. He reached for a glass of water, his fingers, long and powerful, curling around the fragile stem. "We will talk in private later. For now, you will sit and you will eat. You are my wife, and you will show my men that you are strong enough to stand beside me. Don't embarrass me, Kara." The implied threat was quiet, but absolute. Her pride, her own inner strength, instantly responded to the challenge. She would not be the fragile wife, the pawn they pitied. She would play the role, not for him, but for her own survival. She picked up her fork, her hand steadying with a cold resolve. She met Johnny's gaze, a silent promise in her eyes. "You may have bound me, but you have not broken me." For the rest of the meal, she maintained a flawless posture, speaking only when addressed, her silence radiating a controlled power that finally began to earn the respect of the men at the table. She was the boss's wife, hard, elegant, and inscrutable. As the plates were cleared, Johnny rose, his movement commanding the immediate silence of the room once more. "We retire," he announced. The word "we" was a sentence, not a suggestion. He offered his arm, a final, necessary theatrical flourish. Stephanie accepted it, her hand resting lightly on the impeccably tailored wool of his sleeve. Her fingers could feel the solid muscle beneath the fabric. the sheer, unyielding reality of the man who had claimed her. The long walk out of the dining hall felt like the walk of a condemned woman, heading not to execution, but to a perpetual sentence. And as they walked, Johnny leaned in one last time, his voice a low, private rumble that resonated in her soul. "Well done, Mrs. Russo. Now let's see if you can maintain the performance in private." The House of Stone was waiting. The door to their chambers was massive, dark wood inlaid with faint, intricate carving, a final, ceremonial barrier. When Johnny opened it, the room beyond was a dramatic departure from the sterile formality of the house. It was a vast space, dominated by a magnificent four-poster bed draped in deep, rich fabrics, and illuminated by a gentle amber light from a distant fireplace. It felt less like a bedroom, and more like a private, opulent sanctuary. As the door closed behind them with a silent, heavy clunk, the air became instantly charged. The silence was no longer formal. It was intimate and absolutely suffocating. Stephanie didn't move. She stood by the door, her back rigid against the cold wood, the train of her gown pooling around her like a defeated wave. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly furious. The presence of the huge bed was a loud, crude declaration of the rights he had just purchased. Johnny didn't approach her. He walked to a dark, heavy sideboard, poured a glass of amber liquid, and turned to face her. He finally shed the performance, but the control remained. "You have your security, Stephanie," he said, his voice level. "Your father's family is safe. The accord is sealed. The life you thought you had is gone. Now we discuss the life you have." He took a slow sip of the drink, his dark eyes never leaving her face, searching, demanding a response. "There is nothing to discuss," she managed, her voice tight, a bowstring pulled too taut. "There is only the agreement that I will find a way out of this, and you will regret the day you decided to bind me with a lie." She watched his jaw tighten, a small, subtle movement that was the only visible sign of her words reaching him. He was a man accustomed to obedience, not defiance. He set the glass down with a measured, deliberate sound that echoed in the quiet room. Then, with a slow, almost agonizing lack of haste, he began to unbutton the cuffs of his tailored jacket. The action, so mundane, became deeply intimate and predatory under the circumstances. "Regret is a luxury I do not afford myself, Stephanie. Especially not when it comes to you." He stripped the jacket off, tossing it neatly over the back of a nearby chair, revealing the sharp, powerful lines of his shoulders beneath the stark white of his shirt. She felt a hot flush rising up her neck. This was a silent, escalating confrontation. The tension in the room was a living, breathing thing, wrapping around them both. "You can't just remove my life and replace it with this fortress," she insisted, pushing herself away from the door, a desperate attempt to gain ground. "I am not a statue. I have a mind, a will, and I will not be your compliant bride." Johnny finally moved. He walked toward her, not quickly, but with a deliberate, slow pace that was more menacing than a run. Every step reduced the distance, escalating the tension to a painful crescendo. "I do not want a compliant bride," he countered, stopping mere inches from her, forcing her to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. His scent, a clean masculine blend of wool, soap, and a hint of the liquor, enveloped her, intoxicating her anger. His hand reached out, not to seize her, but to gently cup her jaw, his thumb resting near her ear. The contact was electric, yet soft, a terrifying mix of control and genuine fascination. "I want a woman who fights, a woman who questions, a woman who will keep me on my toes, just as you have done since the moment you looked at me on the altar," he murmured, his voice now lower, deeper, edged with an intensity that was purely personal. "I want you, Stephanie. All of you. The woman behind the resistance." His eyes dropped, focusing on her mouth. His proximity was overwhelming. Her heart was now beating a frantic, erratic rhythm against her ribs, betraying the fierce calm she desperately tried to maintain. "I may have trapped you with a contract, But I did not trap your mind," he continued, his thumb gently caressing the curve of her jaw. "You are here. You are safe. You are mine. Now what are you going to do about it, my wife?" It was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down in the privacy of their chamber. He wanted her to fight, because it meant she was truly engaging with him, not just the title he held. Stephanie stared into his dark eyes, seeking an answer, an escape, but finding only the reflection of her own confusion and a raw, unwilling spark of attraction. The moment was suspended, heavy with the weight of unspoken desire and the absolute impossibility of their situation. She felt a tremor run through his hand, a tiny human sign that her resistance was affecting him. He began to lift the veil from her head, his fingers moving with an unnerving gentleness. The lace slid away, a final symbolic removal of the last barrier of her pretense. "Let's stop playing, Kara," he whispered, his eyes dark with an unmasked, fierce devotion. "You are my reality now. Let me show you what that means." The weight of her fate settled on her. She had been brought to his chamber as a pawn, but she would not be his victim. She was here, and she would fight him on his own turf. She took a breath, the first truly voluntary breath since he had sealed their fate. The white gown, the symbol of her shame, had to go. She met his gaze, the defiance returning, colder and harder this time. "Undo the back then, boss," she challenged him quietly. "Let's see how long the control lasts when the armor comes off." The challenge hung heavy in the air, a silent bomb ticking between them. Stephanie had thrown down her own gauntlet, transforming the vulnerable act of undressing into a confrontation of wills. She saw the slight widening of Johnny's dark eyes, a momentary flicker of surprise that quickly gave way to a calculating, fierce acceptance. He didn't move toward her immediately, honoring the space she had just claimed. He simply studied her, his gaze intense, assessing the deeper meaning of her defiance. "A bold move, Mrs. Russo," he acknowledged, his voice a low, steady current that promised a dangerous game. "We both know that removing the dress is not about comfort. It's about vulnerability. And in this house, vulnerability is a currency you should guard carefully." "Then I'll spend it on you," she retorted, holding his gaze fiercely. "Because the faster this wedding dress comes off, the faster we can move past the lie of the altar and confront the man who truly stands before me." A faint, almost invisible shadow of a smile touched his lips. It was a private approval, a recognition of her spirit. He appreciated the fight. He walked around her slowly, his movements deliberate and quiet on the plush rug. The air stirred slightly as he passed, carrying his warm, clean scent, a distraction she fought hard to ignore. She kept her posture ramrod straight, forcing herself not to flinch as his powerful hands finally reached the intricate row of pearl buttons lining her spine. The process was agonizingly slow. Each tiny button was a delicate barrier, and Johnny treated the task with a meticulous, unsettling patience. His fingers, strong and practiced, moved with a surprising gentleness, brushing against the bare skin of her neck and shoulder blades with feather-light precision. Stephanie closed her eyes, fighting the involuntary shiver that ran down her spine at each touch. It wasn't fear that caused the tremor, but a perverse, electrifying tension. His touch was an invasion, yes, but it was also a profound awareness, making her hyper-conscious of her own body in a way that was both infuriating and undeniably powerful. "It's just a man. Just buttons. Control your breathing." He was so close that she could feel the heat radiating from his chest, hear the slow, deep rhythm of his breathing, a sound that was far too intimate. His focus was absolute, concentrated entirely on the task at hand, yet the entire process felt like a long, drawn-out kiss. "You are shaking, Stephanie," he observed, the whisper so close to her ear that it resonated within her inner ear, a private confession of her state. "It's cold," she lied instantly, her voice strained. "No," he corrected, his voice a low rumble. "It is not the cold. It is the realization that the dress, the armor, is coming off." You are entering a new kind of battlefield, where the terms of engagement are no longer political, but personal. He finished the last button. The lace instantly went slack, falling away from her skin. The entire back of the gown was open, leaving only a thin silk barrier between her and the dangerous warmth of his body. He stepped back, not touching her, the space instantly feeling vast and empty. Stephanie clutched the front of the gown, suddenly desperate to maintain her modesty. The exposure was emotional, not physical. She felt the weight of his gaze on her, heavy and unmoving. "Turn around," he commanded softly, the instruction carrying the weight of an unshakable order. She hesitated for a beat, then spun to face him. Her hands remained tight on the bodice, the only thing holding the white silk in place. She searched his face, expecting a crude triumph, a change in his eyes now that the pretense of the wedding was over. But his expression was still. His eyes were dark, yes, intense, but there was a reverence in them, a profound respect for the vulnerability she had just allowed. It was the look of a man who saw something infinitely valuable and understood that its value lay in its intactness, not its breakage. "You are magnificent, Stephanie," he said, the compliment utterly sincere, devoid of flattery. "And you are mine." The contract guaranteed the bond. Your father's safety guaranteed your presence. Your will guarantee your place. He took one step toward her, closing the gap that she had fought to create. He didn't lift a finger to the silk dress she clutched. Instead, he reached out and gently rested his palm on her chest, right over her wildly beating heart. The heat of his hand seeped through the thin layers of fabric, grounding her, demanding her attention. "I may have taken your freedom, but I will give you a kingdom, Kara," he promised, his eyes burning with an intense, unyielding devotion. "You will never need to fight alone again. The only thing I ask is that you stop fighting me." The gesture was a powerful symbolic claim, not of her body, but of the engine of her emotion. Stephanie could feel the frantic tempo of her own heart against his strong, warm palm. The silence in the room became a deep, resonant commitment. It was the first moment where the cold anger began to thaw, replaced by a dangerous, terrifying fascination. She was trapped, but the bars of her cage were suddenly lined with a possessive, powerful fire. Johnny's hand remained pressed against her chest, a silent declaration of truce and possession. The intense warmth of his palm felt less like a threat and more like a stabilizing force against the erratic thunder of her heart. Stephanie refused to look down, refusing to acknowledge the physical reality of the bond, but she couldn't ignore the slow, steady rhythm of his presence. He finally removed his hand, the sudden coolness of the air on her skin feeling like a loss. He took a small step back, restoring a respectable distance, allowing her to breathe, but never breaking the chain of their gaze. "The room is yours," he stated, his voice returning to a controlled, measured tone. "This is the master suite. You may select any room in the house as your personal study or sanctuary. I have no intention of caging you within these walls, only of securing the borders around them." He was offering a concession, a subtle move in their complicated game. She released the white silk, allowing her arms to drop, her stance still defiant. "A private sanctuary within the gilded cage?" she challenged, her voice laced with weary cynicism. "How generous, boss." He ignored the sarcasm, moving towards a heavy oak door set in the far wall. "You will find that your world is larger than you realize, now that you are under the protection of the Russo name." He opened the door to reveal a vast, meticulously organized walk-in closet, more a dressing room than a mere storage space. It was already stocked. "Your personal effects were collected and moved this morning," he informed her, his expression unreadable. "A selection of appropriate garments has been acquired for the immediate future, until you can assess and replace anything to your own taste." Stephanie's breath caught in her throat. The casual assumption of control, the total erasure of her old life, was a fresh wave of humiliation. He hadn't asked. He had simply acted. She walked toward the closet, her feet moving silently on the thick carpet. She saw shelves of shoes, racks of silk dresses, tailored suits, and comfortable cashmere, all in her size, all her preferred colors and styles, yet all purchased without her consent. It was a bizarre, clinical demonstration of devotion through control. He knew her. He had observed her long enough to acquire the tools of her new life. A small velvet jewelry box sat on the center island. She opened it with a trembling hand. Inside lay a single, simple silver locket, a gift from her mother, the only piece of jewelry she truly valued. It was not a grand piece, yet it was the one thing he should never have touched. "You went through my things," she stated, her voice dangerously quiet. "I ensured the one piece of sentiment you held onto was present for you," he corrected gently, stepping into the room. "Your belongings were vetted for any communication devices that could compromise the safety of this house or you. A necessity, not a breach." His rationale was cold, efficient, and impossible to refute within the dangerous context of his world. He wasn't simply controlling her, he was ensuring her survival. He was providing the armor she didn't know how to choose for herself. She turned back to face him, the small locket clasped tight in her palm. "And what about my freedom? Did you vet that too? Did you decide it was too dangerous to keep?" Johnny's control finally wavered. His eyes, fixed on the locket in her hand, softened for a fleeting moment, a ghost of pain crossing his features. "The freedom you crave, Stephanie, is an illusion outside these walls. It is a leash held by men far less honorable than I am," he countered, his voice lowered, a private, urgent plea. "The world you were born into, the world your father tried to shield you from, sees you as a target. I see you as my vow. This house is not your prison. It is the strongest shield I can offer you." He was not promising romance or choice. He was promising an absolute, unrelenting protection. He stepped closer, his powerful hands reaching for the shoulders of the white gown. "Let me remove this last piece of theater," he murmured, the words gentle. "Sleep, and tomorrow, we will begin the hard work of building trust, a bond that is not based on a contract, but on the certainty that you are safe here." She didn't resist. She was exhausted, defeated by the sheer, unyielding force of his logic and his absolute sincerity. She dropped her hands from the front of the gown. As he gently pulled the heavy fabric down her arms, the gown fell to the floor in a silent white puddle of expensive lace, leaving her standing in a simple, thin silk slip. The abrupt change from the grandeur of the wedding dress to the quiet intimacy of the silk was startling. Johnny did not look at her body. His gaze was fixed on her face, on the vulnerable despair in her eyes. He gently ran the back of his hand along her cheek, a touch of such profound tenderness that it broke through the cold shell of her anger. "Welcome home, Stephanie," he said, his voice a low, binding promise. "You belong here now." He turned and walked toward the bathroom, opening the door without looking back. "The world can wait until morning. The safe room is behind the wall. The door is unlocked. You have the choice to enter it, or to stay here. No one will touch you, Kara, unless you give the command." He was offering her a chamber of absolute security, a silent acknowledgement that he respected her fear. The choice was a heavy one. Stay in the room with the man who had trapped her, or retreat into the cold, silent safety of the concrete vault. Stephanie stood alone, the fallen dress at her feet, the warm light of the fire catching the glimmer of the golden shackle on her finger. She felt the heavy pull of the safe room, the temptation of solitude. But she also felt the profound, unsettling connection to the man who was now standing in the next room. The dangerous boss who had promised her safety, and whose devotion was the only thing standing between her and the brutal reality of the world he knew. Stephanie didn't move for a long time. The white dress lay on the floor, a discarded skin. The open door to the safe room beckoned. A cold, certain refuge. A fortress within the fortress. It was the physical manifestation of her fear and her instinct for self-preservation. Yet she remained in the center of the room, the luxurious, amber-lit chamber that was now theirs. She could hear the faint sound of running water from the adjoining bathroom, a mundane human sound that contrasted sharply with the monumental tension of the day. She walked slowly toward the massive window, pulling back the thick velvet curtain. Outside, the night was a deep, velvet black, illuminated only by a few strategically placed lights that cast long, geometric shadows across the manicured lawns. The view was breathtaking, isolating, and undeniably secure. She couldn't see the walls from here, but she could feel them. A powerful, unseen perimeter of protection. He didn't make me go into the vault. He gave me a choice. It was a minimal concession, but in the context of their forced marriage, it felt immense. It was a sign that he wasn't interested in simple coercion, but in a gradual, terrifying form of acceptance. She let the curtain fall and walked toward the fireplace, running her hand along the cold, carved marble mantel. She was consumed by exhaustion, but sleep felt impossible. The bathroom door opened, and Johnny emerged. He was wearing simple, dark lounge pants, the casual attire making him appear less like the Mafia boss and more like an intensely powerful, utterly intimidating man. The sight of the tattoos that covered his arms, intricate, dark, and flowing, was a visual shock, a stark reminder of the dangerous world he inhabited. He glanced at her, his eyes taking in the fact that she hadn't moved to the safe room. There was a brief, almost invisible flicker of something in his gaze. Not relief, but perhaps a profound, quiet satisfaction. He walked to the window she had just left, checked the lock with a single, precise movement, and then went to the sideboard. He poured his drink and offered her a glass of bottled water without a word. A silent, pragmatic gesture of care. She took it. Their fingers brushed, and the connection was immediate. A sudden, unwanted current that sparked through her. She snatched her hand back, meeting his gaze with renewed defiance. "If you think gestures of domesticity will make me forget what you've done, you are wrong, Johnny," she stated, her voice stronger now. He took a slow sip of his amber liquid, his expression reflective. "I don't expect you to forget, Stephanie. I expect you to learn. Learn that the comfort, the security, and the peace you now possess are the direct result of what I've done, and what I will continue to do." He moved to the fireplace, lighting a thick log with an efficient, silent motion. The flames caught instantly, casting dancing shadows that warmed the room and brought a fleeting sense of intimacy to the vast space. "Your father is not a strong man, Kara," he confided, his voice lowered. A private, almost painful confession. He placed the well-being of his organization over the safety of his daughter. "The deal I struck was not a trap for you. It was a rescue. He had enemies closing in, and they were ready to use you to get to him. The only way to stop them was to make you mine." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her father, the man she had trusted, had been weak. Johnny, the man who had tricked her, had acted out of a fierce, desperate form of protection. The world shifted again. Her anger wasn't misplaced, but its target was wrong. She walked to the foot of the bed, her silk-clad figure illuminated by the firelight. "And you expect me to believe this?" "Believe what you wish," he replied, turning to her, his gaze unwavering. "But look at the evidence. You are here, safe, untouched. Your family is secured. No one will dare cross the borders I have drawn. You are my most valuable asset. And I guard what is mine, Stephanie, with an absolute devotion that few men possess." The word devotion hung between them, a heavy, velvet promise. It wasn't the sweet, light love of fairy tales, but a fierce, binding commitment of loyalty and protection. He finished his drink and set the glass aside. "The bed is large enough to maintain a respectable distance. I will not compromise the trust I need to build with you by acting on pure desire. The contract binds you, but I want your acceptance." He walked to the far side of the bed, slowly pulling back the heavy covers. He was giving her the entire space, giving her the choice to sleep with him, yet enforcing a boundary she desperately needed. "Sleep, Stephanie," he instructed, his voice gentler now. "You need your strength for the life we will build. I will be here. I will be awake. No one comes through that door." He did not lie down. Instead, he went to a velvet armchair near the fireplace, settling into it, the firelight highlighting the severe lines of his face and the intimidating power of his shoulders. He was her guard, her sentinel, her terrifying protector. Stephanie looked at the immense, welcoming comfort of the bed. She looked at the strong, silent man sitting by the fire, a figure of absolute assurance. The cold certainty of the vault was no match for the confusing, heated reality of his presence. She walked around the bed, crawled under the sheets on the opposite side, and turned her back to him. She closed her eyes, exhausted, but keenly aware of the steady, warm glow of the fire and the absolute silence of the room. She was furious, trapped, and utterly, unnervingly safe. She fell asleep to the quiet vigil of the man who had stolen her life to save it, feeling the weight of his unwavering gaze across the darkness, a possession that was slowly beginning to feel like a very dangerous shield. The warmth was the first thing Stephanie registered, a deep, pervasive heat that was alien to her apartment life. It was the heat of the fire, long since dwindled to embers, and the natural heat of the massive chamber, expertly insulated against the world. She woke slowly, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the silk sheets and the strange, unnerving relaxation that only comes from knowing that the perimeter is secure. She opened her eyes and turned her head. The armchair by the fireplace was empty. A brief, sharp panic spiked in her chest. He's gone. He's left. Now's the time. But then she saw him. Johnny was standing by the large window, now flooded with the soft gray light of early morning. He was on a phone call, speaking in low, rapid Italian, his voice a series of controlled, sharp bursts that clearly communicated absolute command. His silhouette against the light, with the dark tattoos visible on his arms, was a portrait of raw, unyielding power. He was the boss, attending to the dangerous business of his empire, but he was doing it right here, in their bedroom. He hadn't left her side. She watched him for a long moment, mesmerized by the quiet intensity of his focus. He wasn't making small talk. He was orchestrating movements, issuing directives, and maintaining the invisible boundaries of his control. He hung up and stood silent for a beat, absorbing the information, before he turned and saw that she was awake. He didn't startle. He simply looked at her, his eyes serious, intense, and utterly unmasked by the performance he wore in public. "Good morning, Stephanie," he greeted her, his voice low and formal. She sat up, pulling the sheets to her chest. The chair looked uncomfortable. He walked toward the bed, a slow, deliberate approach that focused her attention. He stopped at the edge, placing his hands on the heavy carved wood of the footboard. He maintained a respectful distance, acknowledging the vulnerability of her position. "It was sufficient," he replied. "I did not sleep. A man who runs an empire must be awake when the world is still dreaming." He was telling her, without fanfare, that he had kept his vigil, that he had spent the entire night ensuring her protection. The fact was heavy, demanding a response beyond simple anger. "And now," she challenged, "do I get a tour of my prison? A list of my new duties as the Mafia boss's wife?" Johnny's eyes did not waver. "You get what you need, Stephanie. I have a schedule to maintain. You will be introduced to the staff and given full access to the house. You are the Signora now. The household runs by your command. Your only duty is to command it." He was giving her authority, not just a title. He was making her a figure of power within the domestic sphere, not a caged bird. He turned toward the closet. "I have arranged for breakfast to be served in the sunroom. When you are dressed, I will escort you. Until then, the perimeter is secured, and no one will disturb you." Before he left, he paused by the door, his hand on the knob. "One thing, Stephanie. The people you will meet, the household staff, the security detail, they are loyal to me, but they serve you now. They have seen the ring. They know the contract is sealed. Do not, under any circumstances, show them any weakness or confusion. Any sign of internal division is an invitation to my enemies. You must project strength." His warning was a quiet but absolute demand for her performance. The stakes were not just her pride, but the security of the entire house, and perhaps the safety of her family. "And what about my father?" she asked, her voice tight. "Am I permitted to send him a message? To confirm he is safe?" Johnny finally showed a flicker of emotion, a moment of cool consideration. You may send him a brief, formal message through my channel. One line. The alliance is secure. I am well. Nothing more. I need his focus to remain on his own defense. He was controlling the communication, but she realized it was less about punishing her and more about maintaining the strategic integrity of the situation. He was keeping the world outside in a state of controlled balance. He looked at her once more, his eyes lingering on her face, a brief, silent acknowledgement of the beautiful, complicated tension between them. Choose a dress, Stephanie. Something that reflects your position. This is the first day of your life as my wife. It must be met with authority. He opened the door and left, the quiet click of the latch the only sound. Stephanie slid out of the bed, the silk slip feeling like a second skin. She walked to the large walk-in closet, the sight of the rows of expensive, untouched clothes no longer a humiliation, but a tool. He wanted her to project strength. She would give him an empire of authority. She chose a dress in a deep sapphire blue, a color of strength and royalty, the opposite of the white lace of the ceremony. As she dressed, she looked down at the golden ring, no longer seeing a shackle, but a profound, dangerous vow. She was the Signora now. The boss had given her the stage, the costume, and the rules of the performance. Her internal fire was not extinguished. It was merely channeled. She would play the part, but she would play it for herself. And by the end of this, she would find a way to turn his protective devotion into a prison for him. Stephanie felt the solid weight of the sapphire blue dress, a garment that felt more like armor than silk. It was a precise, elegant contrast to the vulnerability of the night before, and she used its structure to anchor her spine. Her hair was pulled back into a simple, severe knot, revealing the clean lines of her jaw, a physical manifestation of her newly hardened resolve. The only jewelry was the golden wedding band, now a permanent fixture, radiating its cold, binding truth. She opened the bedroom door and found Johnny waiting. He was in an immaculate black suit once more, the dark wool absorbing the light. He looked less like a man of leisure and more like a fortress ready for battle. His eyes swept over her, a swift, discerning assessment that lingered for a fraction of a second before meeting her gaze. A brief, almost imperceptible nod of approval was his only communication. "The blue suits you, Kara?" he noted, his voice low. "It speaks of cold certainty." "It speaks of the role you've forced me into," she corrected him, her voice even and cool. She did not raise her voice, but the challenge was clear. He didn't dispute it. He simply extended his arm, the gesture formal and necessary. "Then let us go and introduce the certainty to the household." She placed her hand on his forearm, the contact a jolt of contained energy. They walked through the silent, enormous corridors, their footsteps hushed by the thick carpeting. The air, though warm, was thick with the atmosphere of an empire constantly being maintained, a pervasive sense of alert, silent vigilance. The sunroom was a chamber of dazzling light, an enclosed space of glass and white ironwork, filled with the scent of fresh pastries and rich coffee. It was the only part of the house that felt genuinely open, a contradiction to the stone fortress surrounding it. A small, efficient team of staff, the housekeeper, a cook, and 2 young aides, stood respectfully against the wall. They were dressed in impeccable, dark uniforms, their posture perfect. They were waiting for their new Signora. As they entered, Johnny's hand briefly pressed the small of her back, a final, silent reminder of his presence and his command for her to project authority. He led her to the table set for 2, and before taking his own seat, he spoke to the gathered staff, his voice firm and carrying the weight of absolute finality. "This is my wife, Stephanie Russo. She is your mistress. Her command is my command. Any disrespect, any lapse in security, or any failure to comply with her wishes will be considered a personal affront to me." He didn't give her a choice. He simply installed her power. Stephanie felt the weight of their combined gaze, respectful, nervous, and utterly obedient. She was no longer just the daughter of a rival. She was the central fixture of this man's world. She looked at the housekeeper, a woman with kind but guarded eyes. "Thank you," Stephanie said, her voice clear, her tone formal but not unkind. "You may carry on with your duties. I will require a full inventory of the house's operations by the end of the day." It was an instant assertion of control, not a petty request, but a direct command that established her administrative role. The housekeeper's surprised but respectful nod was her first small victory. Johnny watched the entire exchange, and when the staff had quietly exited, a shadow of approval finally appeared in his eyes. "Efficient," he praised, pouring her coffee. "You understand that authority is a necessity, not a luxury here." "I understand that your enemies are looking for a weakness," she countered, taking the cup from him, careful not to let their fingers touch this time. "And I will not be it." She took a sip of the coffee, rich and bitter, the heat welcome. She looked directly at him across the elegantly set table. "Now, we talk about the terms," she stated, putting down her cup. "I am your wife on paper. I will be your signora in public. But you need to understand the true nature of the contract you've imposed. I will not be a prisoner in this room. I require autonomy. I will have a communication channel that is private. And I will have access to my father, vetted or not. You took my choice, Johnny, but you will not take my identity." Her challenge was a precise, measured delivery of demands, not a frantic plea. Johnny leaned back, a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes. He was not angry. He was fascinated. "You learn fast, Kara," he murmured, the use of the endearment suddenly feeling earned, a mark of his respect. "A private channel is impossible. Security is non-negotiable. But access to your father can be arranged, under my terms, in my presence. For your autonomy." He paused, leaning forward, his gaze intense, capturing her completely. "Your autonomy is your ability to maintain control over yourself, even when surrounded by the chaos of this life. You have the run of the house. You have the command of the staff. The only door that remains locked to you is the one that leads out of my protection. I am not your jailer, Stephanie. I am your permanent anchor. The only contract I care about is the one that says you are mine, and I will keep you safe, no matter what." His devotion was overwhelming, terrifying, and utterly binding. Stephanie looked at the ring on her finger, then met his gaze with a cold, fierce determination that matched his own. She was trapped, yes, but she was not broken. She would use the power he had given her to find the loophole in his devotion. She took a final sip of her coffee. "Then let the work begin, boss," she concluded. "But be warned, what is yours may not remain yours forever. I fight for what I believe in, and I believe in freedom." The fight had officially begun. The alliance was sealed, and the war for her heart and her will had just started in the quiet safety of the sunroom. Stephanie stood alone on the private terrace outside their bedroom chamber, 3 days into her new life as Signora. The night air was cool against her skin as she gazed at the star-filled sky, finally allowing herself a moment of unguarded solitude. Johnny emerged from the bedroom onto the terrace, stopping when he saw her. For the first time since the wedding, he didn't approach with commanding authority. He simply watched her, seeing not the Signora, not his possession, but the woman beneath all the armor they both wore. He walked slowly toward her, and this time his approach held no predatory intent, only a quiet need to be near her. When he reached the balustrade, he stood beside her, not touching, both of them looking up at the infinite stars above. "You don't have to guard me every moment," she said softly, her voice carrying no accusation, only curiosity. He turned to look at her, and for once, his mask was completely gone. "I don't do it because I have to," he replied quietly. "I do it because when you're near, the rest of the world finally makes sense." Slowly, tentatively, she reached out and placed her hand over his on the balustrade. It was the first time she had touched him by choice. His eyes dropped to their joined hands, and she saw something she'd never seen before. Hope mixed with fear that she might pull away. He turned his hand beneath hers, their palms meeting, fingers slowly intertwining. They stood there under the infinite stars, no longer jailer and prisoner, no longer boss and captive bride, just two people beginning to find each other in the darkness. Maybe, she whispered, her walls finally cracking. This could become real. It already is, Kara, he breathed, his thumb gently caressing her hand. It always was. After their hands intertwined beneath the stars, the silence between them dissolved. Johnny's free hand slowly lifted to caress her face, his thumb tracing the gentle curve of her cheek. Stephanie caught her breath as she looked at him, and in that moment, all the barriers finally fell. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to step away, but she didn't. Instead, she rose onto her toes, closing the distance between them, and their lips met in a first kiss, tender,